All right, are in the last grouping of March releases for short reviews. This time it is only 8. And I'll say up front that there's a couple here that are essential, and then a lot of them are non-essential or just not really my type of thing, but I still wanted to cover them because they were memorable in some way. Uh, yeah, the one major recommendation this month or this week is Aphotic's Abyss Gazer, and the only reason I didn't do a full review of this is admittedly because I wrote down the wrong months on my notes, and I was preparing to review it next month. So it did sneak up on me in the last few days as I double checked, and I haven't admittedly spent enough time with it to give it a full detailed review. But if this is a band out of Italy, and they include former members of Epicrosis, which was a death metal band that split up more recently. They had a 2017 full length that was pretty strong, and two of the members are from Fuoco Faccio, who I've reviewed before for at least one of their albums. That is a darker funeral doom metal act with a pretty interesting take on that. And in a lot of ways, this band will reflect a little bit of a Bolzer-esque approach on their earlier records. It has some of that call and response feeling of Jade's most recent full length, and they kind of sum the difference between those things and a band like Into Coffin, which is a more dramatic, atmospheric death doom metal band that is quite heavy nonetheless. So there's a lot of great things happening on this record. It is a very heavy record, and one that has a lot of nuance to it. That is, sometimes it approaches sort of an industrial metal feeling at times, but never too pronounced. The way I kind of took this record in was it's like an overactive imagination kind of running on through a lot of ideas, and that's a really good thing in death metal, especially a more atmospherically inclined death doom metal record. So I was impressed with it. I definitely give it a high recommendation. I just didn't get around to it as soon as I wanted to, and maybe the score will be higher once I've spent some decent time with it. So check that out. Angerod is a South Dakota-based death metal band who are sort of known for finding an interesting way around the usual Boss HM2 pedal paradox, where it's just kind of a lot of boring mush. The Profound Recreant is their third full-length album, and for me, this is a bit of a disappointment. I liked the first two records, and I felt like they were still tangentially related to the Dismember and Unleashed style of that, and now they've leaned into something which is more akin to like a modern Behemoth influence sound, where there's a lot of bombast, there's a lot of volume involved with everything. All of the vocals have multiple registers firing off at once. There's a lot of kind of non-directional riffs, which are just sort of structural, that never really amount to a catchy, interesting, or flowing death metal song. A lot of it is a lot of posturing and very heavy, aggressive attack that never quite breaks out into a tangent here, there, or anywhere. So the multi-layered vocals are overdone. They're constantly firing off, and the riffs just don't land anywhere. So I was left with no real substance. I know, and I hate to be harsh because I liked this band's first two records, but this one just did literally nothing for me until I kept sitting with it, trying to see, because I wanted to cover it, but it just none of it ever stuck. The songs are just not there. The riffs are just not there, and yeah, I was a little surprised. I thought I was missing something, or I was just not in the right mood, or whatever it was. But this record just totally flopped for me. But I could see somebody more engaged with more accessible, maybe stadium level death metal would appreciate this. But for me, I'd rather go pick up a Body Farm record for that kind of thing. So see if it's your thing. See if that's what you're all about.
Ignoble and prime, I am their father. Deplorable, ruinous slime, I am what you see. Vitriol and evil.
Nerva Chaos is a Brazilian death metal band, and uh, Chthonic Wrath is what? It's maybe their 10th or 11th full length. They've been around since 1996. Their first full length came out in 1998. And I've always followed this band, but I never really liked much of their material until they hit upon maybe like 2019 or 2020 when they started putting out records that seemed a little bit more interested in bringing a death thrash feeling back in, a little bit more of a laid back approach to some of their songwriting. And that's kind of what we get here on this record is kind of they've always had direct references to classic thrash metal riffs like Slayer and Metallica in their music. That's a given, and that's kind of one of the reasons why they're cool. But this record definitely has more of a steady thrashing groove to it that just is on the attack, and much in the way like a kind of a garage level death metal band would be back in the early 90s or maybe mid 90s once groove metal was more of a thing. So I got into this record. I thought it was pretty cool. It just doesn't do anything that shocks the shit out of me. It doesn't impress me beyond the kind of known realm of this band, which is still pretty good. So if you're a fan of, like I say here, if you're a fan of earlier Torture Squad, I think you'll appreciate where this record is coming from. And there's a couple of surprise songs in here that I think are worth Silu Haska, um, however you pronounce their name. Uh, they've just come out with or they're about to come out with their first EP beyond their split with Foetus. And this is a Finnish black metal band of these expectedly somewhat melodic variety. They do have a little bit of a depressive touch to their music, and every song on here is pretty catchy. It's a pretty good record. It's a really great introduction to the band, and as a mini LP, it's fairly substantial with over 20 minutes of song here, and the cover that they do of Hamis, or however you pronounce her name, is a little bit punkish. It adds some a good energy to the full listen, and they're just every song on here is catchy, and that counted for quite a lot with me. I spent a lot of time with this EP that I didn't need to, and the only thing is it's not anything that I haven't heard before, and it's not quite as sophisticated as the leading bands that I would consider are in this style, like Sargeist and whatnot. So take it as you will. If you like Finnish black metal, you're probably going to enjoy this band, and I think they show like a lot of potential here. I can't wait to see what they do on their inevitable full length here. So Grieve is a classic uh, Finnish black metal band from members of Satanic War Master and Bargrav, who they started their collaboration back in like 2019 or so, put out a self-titled 12-inch that I covered, and then they put out a record called Funeral, killed it off, and then they brought it back. And so this is a quick follow-up that is still very much in that classic Finnish black metal style, probably more in like the late 90s, early 2000s kind of revival feeling that is miserable, vulgar, a little bit strange, off on a rant often, and mayhemic in the best way possible. Like there's an intoxicated value to this record that wasn't necessarily there on the first two, and it's pretty entertaining. I enjoyed it quite a bit. Uh, at first, it doesn't really stand out, and it's just very obnoxious, and I very much appreciated that. That is black metal and what I'm looking for. But when we hit songs like Glacier and Eternal Winter, Eternal War, I started to see there was a lot more that they maybe more serious songs they could be doing that are that good that it kind of made me pull back on the more crazed stuff and want some of those more classic feeling songs that are there. So a very strong record overall. I think that it just gets a moderate recommendation because you know, I think they did a little bit. the first record was a little bit more compelling, and this one is just a bit more fun and just uh, kind of out to get a reaction, which I enjoyed in another way. But yeah, very cool. Smallpox Aroma is a Bangkok, Thailand based uh, grindcore band, and I would say gore grind with some brutal death metal influences. And a lot of this is meant to feel more old school. It is more in the punk direction than it is the death grind direction, and definitely leaning towards nasum here and there. Although the pinging snare sound will bring you back to bands like Last Days of Humanity and the the days where brutal death metal and gore grind were fusing together into a lot of hilarious bedroom projects. But overall, this is more serious than that seems, and it is a very good record. It has riffs. It does come from folks who I would assume play in death metal bands related to the label, and they kind of hit it there in terms of an entertaining sound, plenty of riffs, and all that. It just this isn't really my kind of thing. I couldn't see myself coming back to it repeatedly. I'm not big on gore and surgery as I get older and don't give a shit to stare at it. So that's my point of view. If it's your thing, I totally get that. But I have a lot of these records, and this was a pretty solid version of that that I can appreciate on a level of just being good, just not my thing. So see if it is your thing. So, The Evil is a doom metal band from Wagner Antichrist, who you'd know from Sarcophago, as well as the current bassist for Chakal, as well as I think they just got a new vocalist here, Mistress Warnos, who is a little maybe has a bit more range than the original vocalist had, and they make good use of this on this conceptual record, which sees the world as too far gone, controlled by evil. It's hell on earth, and these seven acts are our path to the apocalypse. It's a simple concept that you would sort of expect, but they pull it off in a really entertaining way. They move from more of the psychedelic stoner side of doom towards something that has influence from Candlemass and like maybe the Devil's Blood, which is not quite avant-garde, but there are operatic moments that show up here and there that make it a really interesting listen, something kind of special and unique. And I thought it was a great improvement on the first record, which was all right when it came out, but this is something a little bit more memorable and much better arranged and written. So this more of a recommendation on this one, and yeah, check it out. So there isn't a lot to talk about in terms of British black metal. There are just a strong handful of bands that are great, and then there are a lot that are just a bit average. And I'd always felt like Old Forest was one of this One Fellow Kobold's bands that was maybe better than the other ones, but was still just a bit middling. And nonetheless, it did have a unique atmospheric lilt to it. And over the course of several albums beyond 2016 or so, he's developed a unique kind of doom scented form of black metal, which is pretty strong overall. Now, this record pulls back on a lot of what Mournfall was doing in terms of a more active and more engaging sort of doom influence that might have had some like melodic doom influences, and now leans more into the just atmospheric metal exploration, which is a little bit folkish, a little bit progressive, and just not quite as mired in doom as was never pronounced to me, that doom metal influence, but people kept mentioning it to the point where I had to, talk about it. Anyway, it's an all right record. It's very sleepy, not really my thing, but it still got a recommendation for being well performed, well produced, and very listenable overall. I like the slower songs on here and the way they develop. And I think later on there's a couple of pieces that were more folkish and memorable to some degree. So worth checking out. That might be your thing. It was just all right for me.